My dad had recently lost his job and moved us across state to his childhood town. It was a small farming town, not really ideal for anyone wanting to do anything with their life, but we were in a tough spot. My dad claimed he wanted to move back to see his parents more, but we weren't close to them. I knew that it was because the housing was so cheap in the area, and it made sense as to why. Everything was so behind in the times, easily dating back at least 10 years. My sister and I were both in middle school, so you can imagine the transition of changing schools halfway through the year. We're at least 2 years apart grade-wise, but 3 years apart in reality. My little sister was very smart for her age, which made things interesting, considering that I had to watch after her. Ever since the accident, I had to take on the role of her mother, which is something no 14-year-old should have to do. I don't know what exactly happened, and Dad doesn't like to talk about it, but I pieced enough of it together that her mother's passing was a violent one. I was so young when it happened that it almost feels like a memory that doesn't belong to me, something merely implanted from someone else's experience. The one thing that got me through such a tough time were my friends, and seeing how I had to leave them, I felt as if I was leaving a part of myself. It felt as if I was leaving the safe and familiar harbor for more treacherous seas. The living room was still full of boxes as Sandra and I got ready for school. Our outfits were mismatched, so we tried our luck opening unmarked boxes, hopefully to find something remotely suitable to wear. "Alright guys, let's pick something quick. I need to take you guys to school and I'm already late for work," my dad said, defeatedly. Sandra shot me a look before diving back in to retrieve an outfit. What I had on wasn't exactly fashionable, but it would have to do. Despite all the chaos my life had given so far, there was one thing I did have to look forward to. I tried to be optimistic with most things, and I saw this as a new chapter in my life. A new fresh start. A clean slate. That hopefully I could try my luck at being popular here. I wasn't popular at my old school, but I think I could be if I had the right start here. Sandra and I hopped into the car, and Dad routed us to school. As we pulled up to the location routed on my dad's phone, he was surprised that the town had a new middle school, one different than the one he had as a child. "Huh?" he said. "Looks like they got rid of O.P. Evans." The school was rather nice, despite the clear setback that the town had on it. The 2-story building stood out amidst the old buildings that were near the area. Man, it was probably good they got rid of that old school. That place was old even when I went there. I could see a look on my dad's face as he reminisced of old memories. A slight smile began to crawl across his face. "Oh man, that's right," he whispered to himself. "You okay, Dad?" Sandra said from the back seat. Yeah, I'm good. You guys hop on out and I'll tell you a good scary story when you come home tonight." We jumped out of the car and waved as he took off out of the parking lot. The small crowd of kids funneled their way inside as they were being guided by teachers and went to class. As I walked in the halls of school, I couldn't help but think of what my dad was smiling about. What could his scary story possibly be? It didn't take long for me to forget the morning, as I was doing my best to try to make new friends at school. I wasn't having much luck considering I was probably trying too hard. I did, however, eventually make a small group of friends in my one drama class. They were not popular, but we had enough in common that I was able to make it work. It wasn't the outcome I was looking for, but I was just happy to have made a small group of friends. They were all nice, although some of them were kinda weird, but that was fine. I took that win for the day as a smile plastered across my face. The rest of the day after that seemed to fly by. School eventually ended and I met Sandra outside of the school as we waited for Dad. "Hey Sandra," I said. "How was your day?" I asked as a smile still lingered on my face. "Pretty good all around. All my classes have good teachers," she said while nodding. "Did you make any friends? Meet any cute boys?" I egged her on. She blushed briefly. No, not yet." Sandra was smart as she was shy. We got along pretty well and she would oftentimes just join my group of friends by association, which I really didn't mind. Normally something like that would have probably bothered me, but ever since Mom died, I made sure that she was included with things. Dad eventually pulled up, clearly tired from work. He faked a smile as we hopped in the car. "Hey girls, how was school?" "It was good. How was work?" I replied. "Work is work," he said while chuckling. He always said that, which made himself laugh, which I found amusing. We pulled out of the parking lot and started driving home, when Sandra piped up from the back. Dad, tell us that scary story you mentioned this morning." My dad shot me a look and a mischievous grin returned. "Oh, do I have a scary story for you?" he said in an eerie voice. "Wait, let me see if I can find the place first." My dad then drove through town peering down old streets as if he was looking for something. As we drove, he told us a story about his old school he used to attend. How the school O.P. Evans used to be a prison before being turned into a school. He took us down a couple back roads, kinda tucked away from the already slow back streets that the town seemed to have an endless amount of. Surely enough, we eventually found it. An old building, about 2 stories high. A tall chain-link fence surrounded the once school. Razor wire was tangled in a mess above the fence, making sure no one was climbing over it. But ironically enough, the front gate to the school had since been rusted and withered, and now sat askew, leaving large gaps near the gate frame that one could easily crawl through. Ah, yes, there it is. So the story about this school is that it used to be a prison. Certain sections of the building were closed off, as they were no longer needed, or too dangerous to have kids around. They took out most of the cells obviously, but left a few that were built into the actual building. Anyways, so what we would do when we were younger was that we would sneak in here after soccer practice and try to explore the certain sections that were forbidden. The staff would make up rumors like ghosts haunted the sealed off sections, or that some terrible monster would grab you. But one time, a buddy of mine, Mike, snuck into the basement. Now the basement didn't have any cells, but it did have old piping in areas unknown to even the staff. Now he swears that he saw something down there that changed him. He used to be a fun-loving and rambunctious child, but after that event, he always seemed on edge. Sandra and I looked at the old school with mixed emotions of bewilderment and awe. The school's appearance alone looked terrifying. If I didn't know any better, this was clearly a place that housed some forbidden terror. Tormented spirits or other creatures of the night certainly dwelt here. We sat parked for a couple of minutes as Dad looked at the building that certainly housed many memories for him. We all eventually came back to reality and drove back to our sad lives. Today for me was a disappointment in some ways, but also successful in others. I wasn't with the popular group, but I did make some friends. It was also good to see my dad no longer his sad, miserable self, but able to see a brief glimpse of his inner child that he once was. Not much changed after that day. Despite my best efforts, Dad continued just to get by. My own attempts to be popular never resulted in anything meaningful, and the sad state of the town slowly began to drag us down with it. I got by in school, but it was difficult. My new friends were the only thing that seemed to keep my head above water. My friends and Sandra, that is. The 5 of us eventually became pretty close. Rebecca, Stacy, and Jared slowly became a common sight around my house. They were quirky, but polite, which my dad seemed to enjoy. I think he was just happy that Sandra and I had something to look forward to. Since the town was so small, we had to come up with new ways to entertain ourselves. Video games were a go-to, but it was hard since there were 5 of us and only 4 controllers. What we would normally like to do would go out and play on the small playground and try to parkour, but none of us were any good. But that was the fun thing about our group. We always found a way to make something out of nothing. Oddly enough, the small town had a rather large cemetery. If we were feeling up to it, we would play ghosts in the graveyard at night. However, we eventually got caught by the police, which we weren't allowed back in. One day after school, we sat in the drama room discussing what we should do tonight. It had been a while since we played Ghosts in the Graveyard, but we were all dying to play. We tried playing a few rounds in the new school, but the few staff that stayed late after work had gotten mad at us. We sat there discussing other places to play when an idea popped into my mind. I know where we can play, but... The group looked at me as I paused. But the place is a bit creepy. My warning was anything but. Everyone aside from Sandra began to smile. But what was this place you're thinking of? There's nothing left in town that we haven't tried. Before I could respond, Sandra piped up. She's thinking of the old school. All of them were confused. What old school? Jared replied. For some reason, no one knew what we were talking about. It was as if the town had swept this creepy building under the rug and away from public eyes. Yeah, there's this place tucked away that my dad used to go to school here. It's in town, but it's kind of far, if we're walking, that is. I mean, what else are we gonna do? Jared said. We all agreed to meet at my house after we all went home to grab a couple things that we thought we might need. Sandra and I walked home and Dad wasn't there yet. I could feel the slight sensation of dread build in my stomach as I didn't want to go inside of that place, but I was the one to suggest it. Plus, I didn't want to look lame in front of my friends, or even Sandra. About an hour had passed and the group showed up at my house. Stacy and Rebecca both had backpacks of items, as well as flashlights. Jared had a headlamp and a samurai sword. Really, dude? I said, and I let them in the house. Jared had convinced his mom to let him take the car for the night. I don't know if she knew about the sword, though. We all piled in and took off down the back streets while Sandra and I tried our best to remember where the school was. Time was not on our side as the sun had set and it was getting dark. This made recognizing the half-dozen back streets all the more difficult. Unfortunately, Sandra had a photographic memory, or at least so she claimed. She was successful in guiding us to the old school, further validating her memory claim. Jared dropped us off as he parked the car off a ways, on the off chance that someone would come here and see it parked. The four of us waited as Jared returned. The school stood more ominous than what I remembered. The night definitely didn't help ease my nerves in any way. The gate was still lopsided, leaving the gap for us to crawl through. We all squeezed through one by one and began circling around to find a way inside. As we expected, most entrances were either boarded up or locked. Now remembering it was once a prison, I should have expected it to be difficult to break into. Our flashlights scanned the building, looking for any possible opening or even a clue to allow us access inside. The dark overgrowth of trees and brush gave off muffled sounds of nightlife, slightly easing the already building tension. We walked around back and checked all the doors. They all appeared to be secure. Out of frustration, Jared swung his sword at one of the boards that covered a door, which got stuck in the soft decayed wood. We all looked at each other with light bulbs going off in our brains. Although the sword was fairly low quality, he was able to cut just enough for us to get our hands inside and pull chunks of the board off the doorway. In a matter of 5 minutes, we had produced a hole big enough that we could squeeze through. We had Jared lead the way as he stepped inside the dark school. We then handed him our bags as we all slipped in one by one. Inside, the smell of faint mold and a mystery odor slowly came to our nostrils. We shined our light inside and sure enough, the old building had the appearance of a dated school. Rooms without doors held old desks and sat in disarray, as it was clear that we were not the first ones to find this abandoned school. Old tile lined the floors, and bare walls sat silently, holding in many secrets it had seen over the years. The idea to play Ghosts in the Graveyard had been put on hold, as the amazement of investigating such a peculiar place had slowly become our main objective. That is until Stacy spoke up. "Wait," she whispered. "We shouldn't investigate first. We should just play. That way it'll be extra hard to find each other." The group agreed. Rebecca picked a number and we all had to guess. Sandra was the closest, thus making her the ghost for the first round. Sandra ran off into the dark school as we all counted before going to look for her. When we reached the allotted amount of time, we broke up into 2 teams to search for her. Sandra was the unspoken champion at the game. The one time we got caught in the cemetery, she had hit so well that the police were not able to find her. We decided to split up. Stacy and Jared went one direction and Rebecca and I went the other. We found a set of stairs that led to the second story, which we hesitantly went up. The stairs were towards the front of the building. None of the higher windows were boarded up, considering no one could reach them from the outside. It was more of the same on the second floor. Some garbage laid on the ground and occasional teaching material was seen here and there. For the most part, the school was fairly clean. It was clear that not many people had been here since its closure. We checked each classroom, which yielded no result. The building was shaped in a U, which we followed. Our flashlights were the only source of light in the building, and it was incredibly dark. There were no streetlights on the road, nor anything outside the school that still worked. The moon wasn't out tonight, making our game especially dark. We spent a good 20 minutes on the second floor, inspecting each room for Sandra, while also scoping out a good spot to hide when it was our turn. The shadows casted by our flashlights were eerie. Every now and then, they would cast what looked like an outline of some sort of shadow person before my eyes were able to make sense of what I was looking at. We had reached the end of the second floor when lights from outside shined in. My heart dropped as we ran to the window to see an old pickup truck pull up to the rusted gate out front. An old farmer type got out and unlocked the gate before pulling into the courtyard. The truck was an older model and was pretty loud. Rebecca and I gasped as we were unsure as to why this man had pulled in. Was he security? Did he now own the property? More importantly, did he know that we were in here? I wanted to sprint down the stairs and try to warn the others, but I had no idea where they were. I couldn't yell because that would alert the old man outside. All we could do was watch as he parked near the front of the school. He got out again and unlocked the front door of the school and went back to the end of his truck, all the while leaving his truck running. The headlights gave just enough light that we could see what looked like a tarp covering something on his truck bed. The man came to the front of the truck, carrying what looked like an old rolled-up rug, and brought it inside. We sat by the window and listened to see if he was coming up the stairs. We watched as he exited the school and went back to the end of his truck. This time, instead of a rug, he tried to carry what looked like something heavy, wrapped in a bloody bedsheet. The man struggled to lift it and set it on the ground and dragged it inside, leaving a bloody trail behind him. "Oh my gosh," Rebecca whispered. Our fears of being caught had been replaced by something more sinister. It was clear that we were not only somewhere we shouldn't be, but we also saw something way worse. My anxiety began to fill my body as my hands began to shake. I could hear Rebecca starting to cry softly as the realization began to set in. We sat in darkness, just praying that the man would emerge from the school and leave. We could briefly hear the man on the main floor make his way around the school before exiting again, locking the door behind him and leaving the parking lot. It appeared that none of us were detected by the old man. Once he locked up the front gate and headed back down the dirt road, Rebecca and I took off down the main floor. We quietly called out to the group when we spotted the bloody trail on the tile floor. All suspicions had been confirmed. Dark red streaks led inside to an unknown location in the school. It didn't take us long to find Stacy and Jared. They looked equally as terrified as we did. "Did you guys see that guy? He was dragging something heavy and dumped it somewhere," Stacy said as he got close to Jared. Jared looked around frantically, clearly scared out of his mind. "We need to leave. We saw too much. The less we know, the better." "Don't you want to see what he dragged in here?" Rebecca whispered. "Absolutely not," I said. "Let's just find Sandra and get out of here." The other two looked at me nervously. "You didn't find her yet?" "She's not with us. What do you think?" I said sarcastically. "Well, I'm not going to wait around to find your sister. I gotta get out of here. I just need to leave. Jared said. I shot him a look of surprise and anger. Really? You're gonna leave my baby sister here by herself? She doesn't even know what just happened. We have to find her. Jared didn't say anything and he tossed his sword on the ground. Bring it back to me when you're done, he said. I gritted my teeth. You're a coward, I hissed as I picked up the sword. Stacy and Rebecca looked at me with sad faces. You're not gonna make us stay with you, are you? Stacy whimpered. We'll be right outside, Rebecca replied. Don't even bother waiting, I said, as I took off down the hall, leaving Stacy and Rebecca behind. Frustration had replaced my once overwhelming terror. I gripped the sword tightly as I shined my light in hopes of seeing Sandra. I tried calling out to her, but in past games we would trick the ghost and say that the game was over in order to get them to come out. She wasn't gonna believe me. I was gonna have to find her, myself. I shined my light on the main floor in hopes of finding my sister, but I saw no sign of her. Just the occasional desk or the recent streak of red on the tile. I had wished at least one of the girls had stayed with me, but I took off before I could convince them to help. I searched most of the first floor to find myself following the bloody trail. It was unlikely it led to Sandra, but it was the only few places I had yet to look. Oddly enough, the trail led me to the middle of the hallway, and instead of seeing a bloody sheet and a rug, I saw something more surprising. The trail led to a large hole in the floor. The basement, I whispered. I shined my light down the dark hole in hopes of seeing anything, but my light didn't reach that far. I stepped back, frustrated at the position I was in. You would hide down there, wouldn't you? I said while hitting the sword on the hard tile floor. I could hear something shuffling down there. I stepped up to the hole again. Sandra? I called out. The shuffling got closer. I remember my dad's story about the basement. How even when he was a kid, the basement was forbidden, even for the staff. I also remember how my dad's friend had seen something down there that left him scarred. I could feel the anger slowly fade as fear replaced it. I couldn't see anything in the dark pit, but I felt a sensation of dread wash over me, as if the darkness had unseen eyes peering up at me. No matter my fears, I wasn't going to leave my sister, one of the few people to have been there through my darkest days. I turned back around and started looking for some stairs. I checked each classroom, but nothing. I then checked what I assumed to be the front office. I couldn't find any stairs on the main floor, but I did find another hole, except this time it laid next to a wall. I shined my light down below and I saw piping lining the wall leading down to the hole, acting like a natural ladder. I couldn't carry both the sword and the flashlight, so I dropped the sword down into the hole and started climbing in. I reached the bottom and shined my light around. I wanted to call out, but something about the basement made me want to be quiet. It appeared wherever I was in some kind of hallway. I picked up a random direction and hoped for the best. If Sandra wasn't down here, then I had no idea where to find her. The concrete floor had dust on it, which finally dawned on me that it also had freshly made shoe marks as well. But as I looked at the floor, I saw something unsettling. I saw what looked like footprints also. Large footprints. Whatever was down here with this was really big and was also not wearing any shoes. I stopped in my tracks and debated turning off my light. I decided against it as I inched myself forward. By some miracle, I was finally able to hear soft sobbing coming from the far end of the hallway. Boxes and shelves lined the crypt-like area, and my light was able to catch the top part of Sandra's head that was poking out. I quickly rushed over and felt a wave of relief embrace me as I saw Sandra sitting behind the box crying. Before I could say anything, Sandra whispered, "It's not her." Sandra's face was red from intense crying. I was both horrified and confused. What's not her? She tried to catch her breath as she sobbed. "It's not Mom. It just looks like her." My heart skipped a beat. I tried to rationalize what Sandra was saying. Had she been down here too long and was seeing things, or was there actually someone else down here with us? "We're gonna get you out of here, sweetie," I said soothingly. I pulled her up and she could barely stand. She was shaking so much. "Here, you hold this," I said while putting the sword into her hand. "All we have to do now is follow her steps back to the hole and climb out. It'll be easy." Her crying seemed to intensify, but she clutched the sword and I pulled her back over to the opening. We quickly made it back to the hole, but a tall, skinny figure stood a good ways down the way. Strands of hair covered its face, but I could see red gums and yellow teeth through it. "I'm here now. Don't you miss me?" the figure said. Whatever this thing was had immediately disturbed me, but at the same time, it sounded exactly like Mom. It had been years since I heard her voice, but that's a sound that hardly no one ever forgets. I was too scared to move, but I spoke. "What are you doing?" "I missed you. I missed both of you." The thing stepped forward, and I could see dark stains around its mouth and neck. The hole was right next to us. I grabbed the sword from Sandra, and she started frantically to climb. I aimed the light at the creature's face, and it lifted its gnarled hand to block the light. "I was hurt so bad, but I'm better now. Do you want to see?" I glanced behind and saw that Sandra had cleared the hole. She waited at the top and shined the light down at me. I turned to the creature and noticed that even though it was crouched, it was still taller than me. She began to speak, but out of instinct, I threw the sword at the creature and missed badly. I could briefly see a wide smile emerge as it stood upright, no longer needing to pretend now that I was disarmed. As a last-ditched effort, I hurled my light at the creature's head, and miraculously, it connected firmly. The light spun in all directions as it cracked the creature's head, and I began my climb up. Frantic breathing and grunts erupted from the creature. I somehow emerged from the hole, and Sandra pulled me to my feet. We sprinted out of the office area and back to the doorway that we'd entered from. We didn't glance back, not even once. Sandra and I emerged from the school and kept going till we made it out of the fence. Once we cleared the area, we were able to calm down and take a breath. Sandra was still sobbing when she hugged me tightly, and I fought back tears as we slowly walked home.
There's this new guy at work, and I'll call him Eric. Eric is weird, and he's about 36 and has the weirdest sense of humor we've ever seen. He doesn't cause problems though, so we tolerate him, and that's for the most part. He'll crack off some odd, off-colored jokes every now and then, but we let him know. He looks weird. Like, I can't really pinpoint my finger onto why, but something about his face is just unsettling. He was wearing tinted lenses, so I couldn't really make out his eye color either. Personal choice, perhaps. My friend Emily works in the cubicle right next to me, and if anything odd really happens at work, she always is the first person to let me know. It was a couple weeks after it happened. Some guy at work didn't check in for a while, and I overheard my boss speaking to Emily about it. He said that it was probably the flu and that he just was too sick to actually pick the phone up, which I can't believe, since last time I had the flu I was bedbound for almost 2 weeks in what I could only describe as a combination of semi-coma and fever dreams. We figured to wait it out for a couple of days. Our boss says he'll give it a couple more days, and if the guy didn't phone in, he'd try to contact his family to see if anything happened. Meanwhile, Eric's behavior started getting just weird. I'd went downstairs to get to the vending machine, and Eric was there too. As I was getting my food, Eric just stood there staring at me. I noticed he wasn't moving at all, and he wasn't wearing his glasses either. Immediately, the hairs on my arms started to stand up. I noticed the whites of his eyes weren't white. They were this odd aura of sky blue and gray. Even without his glasses being there, his face was just so uncanny. The best way I could describe it would be an unnatural, symmetrical, and doll-like, but it was worse than that. He then slowly started to smile, and after a few seconds, he was smiling ear to ear. Before he smiled, his mouth looked a little too small for his face, but now it was unnaturally wide. There was a deafening silence, so I said, can I help you? And that's when Eric slowly began to walk up the stairs. He was walking up those stairs as if he'd never even seen them before. But that's not all. As he walked up those stairs, there was a god-awful cracking and snapping sound, like a branch snapping. Each time the sound could be heard, he stumbled for a split second. It was almost like walking up the stairs was hurting him. I didn't mention this to my boss because earlier that morning, the ventilation system stopped working and was dripping a foul-smelling liquid. Our boss said that he would get it fixed the next day. One of the vent hole covers was broken off. I could have sworn that I had passed that vent hole a few days ago and it was fine. Probably a rat got in there and just got stuck, my boss says. Eric didn't turn up for work the next day. I told Emily about Eric. She laughed and then said, "Thank God. Guy sounds like a weirdo." Work was fine and I'd largely forgotten about Eric by this time. When we turned up for work the next morning, our boss said the vents are fine and aren't dripping liquid anymore. Probably just like a malfunction that sorted itself out maybe, he said. I went to Eric's cubicle to ask him why he didn't turn up for work yesterday. When I said hi, before asking him, he jumped. Then he began looking around as if he was confused. I was sick, he said. I noticed a jar of some sort which looked like it had meat in it. It almost looked like pulled pork, but it was in a jar. The jar was labeled with the word Nagalik on it. I said, "Hey, is that your lunch?" He paused for a couple of seconds before flatly just saying, "Yes." My girlfriend recently got fired from her job, so while she was trying to get employed at another place, I asked my boss if I could work overtime to help her. He agreed to it, and instead of finishing at 5 p.m., I'd end up working about 9 to 10. It was the first night of overtime that happened. Everyone else had left, including my boss. My office was dark, only lit up by the light of my computer. There was dim scattering lights here and there, but overall, it was pretty dark. I was finishing up my work when I began to hear banging sounds coming from above. It sounded like something blunt knocking on metal. I tried to ignore it, but the bangs just kept getting louder, and I went to investigate where it was coming from. I was in the hallway and I could see the vent. The banging was coming from almost directly above. Then, I noticed the banging sounds were moving. They were moving towards the end of the hallway, towards the vent hall. The banging stopped. The only substantial lighting was coming from my phone flashlight. I was trying to get the video recording on my phone. Just as I was about to take the video, I saw a man's head and face peering out of the hole from my phone camera. I was frozen in fear. It was him. It was Eric. He was just glaring at me with a blank expression, followed by the same damn ear-to-ear smile. My fear turned into amusement as I realized he must have been stuck in the vent. I laughed at him. "Okay, buddy, you scared me, but now you're stuck, and I'm gonna have to try to find somebody to help you out." Eric froze still for a second again. There was no way he would be able to fit through what looked like to be only about an 8x8. I don't think even children could fit in there. That's when Eric thrusted his arms forward. I heard those god-awful snapping and crackling again. His shoulders looked completely broken as he made his way out of the tiny little vent. Then, his head emerged. He was smiling with his teeth this time, but his teeth didn't look right. They looked jagged and razor sharp. In my shock, I saw him fully emerge from the vent, with his shoulders, arms, and hands looking completely twisted and broken. He started dancing while trying to adjust his mangled joints. Then, he looked completely uninjured, but his eyes were so dilated, they looked black. At this point, he lunged at me, and I screamed. I don't know what happened after that. The next thing I remember is being with a bunch of cops telling them a guy at work tried to attack me. They tried to tell me the guy was probably just some homeless dude who got into the building at night, probably just to sleep, and didn't believe what I told them. Since I didn't have any injuries, they didn't take me too seriously. The next morning, I called up my boss and told him that I'll be finding another place to work, since my girlfriend is moving states. That was a lie, of course. I met Emily at the store and asked her about Eric. She told me that he hadn't shown back up to work again. She said that his office was completely empty. I don't care what anyone else believes. I don't know what Eric was, but whatever he was, that look that he had when he saw me, no human could make that look. Sometimes when it's late at night, and I catch a glimpse of the street through my bedroom window, for a second I feel like I see him. It makes me wonder why we as a species evolved to experience the Uncanny Valley. What was it that looked so human, yet scared us so much?
It all started 3 weeks ago. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology at a small university. Specifically, I'm a paleoanthropologist studying old bones and human evolution. Generally, my work is pretty boring. Teaching unappreciative undergrads, doing research on my computer, writing really long papers. It only gets exciting when a field investigator brings back something for us to study. And that's when the trouble began. Kevin Chu came in one morning with a huge grin on his face. He and his team had just returned from England, where they'd been excavating near a Neolithic burial site, Aveline's Hole, and he found something. Something big. My heart was pounding in my chest as I walked down the hallway of the storage facility. He'd been so cryptic, calling the entire department in for an emergency meeting. But as I swung the door open, I saw why. On the table sat a reassembled human skeleton, a nearly perfect one. "Oh my God," I gasped. "She's a beaut, isn't she?" Dr. Katz whispered to me. 10,000-year-old female, nearly complete. He was right. The skull, the ribcage, the curved bones of the arms and legs, they were all there. Only her left femur and a few toe bones seemed to be missing. "We're going to be famous," I whispered. Our department had been steadily declining for years. I'd always assumed my job had an expiration date. But now, as I listened to Kevin ramble on about how they found her, I couldn't stop grinning. But then, my smile faded. There was something off about the skeleton, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I studied the gaping holes where her eyes once were, her crooked jaw half filled with teeth, the long, slender, curved bones that made up her arms and legs. I'd seen hundreds of skeletons before. This was hardly the scariest thing I'd seen. So why did I feel so afraid? I glanced around at the other professors, but they were all beaming with pride. Clearly, they weren't feeling what I was. I looked back down at the skeleton and froze. "Kevin?" I cut in. "Yes, Dr. Vasquez?" "That's not a human skeleton." His smile faded. What do you mean?" "The interorbital distance." I stepped towards the skeleton and pointed between the eye sockets. "Her eyes are too close together." "They look fine to me. There's no way her face would structurally hold up with her eyes that close. The nasal bone would fracture, and the lacrimal bones would deform. And it's not just the skull, I continued, gesturing to her forearm. You can clearly see the radius is longer than the humerus. Her forearms are longer than her upper arms. Really? Kevin stared at me, at a loss for words. I'm sorry, but this is obviously a fake. The room stirred behind me. I felt bad, but me standing up now was better than the school trying to pass off some 13-year-old Halloween decorations as a paleological find. We'd be the laughingstock. I glanced around the room and then stepped back into the crowd, arms crossed. Kevin's eyes locked on mine, and then he smiled. We already tested for its authenticity. It's real. I looked down at the skeleton, looked back at Kevin, glanced at the surrounding professors and researchers, whose eyes were all now on me. I swallowed. I don't know what you found, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But there's no way that thing belongs to Homo sapiens. For a few days, everyone in the department was pissed at me. Dr. Katz told me off, telling me I'd ruined Kevin's big day. The field researchers all gave me dirty looks in the hallway. Even the undergrads seemed to somehow sense the energy against me and gave me snarky answers in class. But then late one night, Kevin Chu came into my office. I didn't even think anyone else was in the building. I was eating takeout in my office, feet up on my desk, listening to Metallica. I had to submit a grant proposal by the morning, and well, frankly, I wasn't exactly looking forward to going back to my shitty apartment. Divorce sucks, and it sucks more when your husband is a sharp-as-nails attorney who will take you to the cleaners without a second thought. As soon as I saw him, my heart sank. Oh, great. He's here to say his piece, yell at me for stealing his big day. I braced myself for his rant, but as he got closer, I realized he didn't look so good. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair was greasy, and when he reached the chair on the other side of the desk, he collapsed in it, panting like he'd just run a mile. It's not human, he said, not even looking at me. Freak, it's not even human, not even in the slightest. You were right. There's something very wrong with her. It's not just her eyes, her arms. All her proportions are off. Her legs are even longer than they should be. So are her fingers. Her pelvis is wide enough to classify her as female, but, well, it's not really the right shape of the normal human pelvis. The eyelet crest isn't even curved right. I stared at him, my heart starting to pound. So I thought she might have a congenital abnormality, you know? Some sort of medical condition that made her proportions different, even though the irregularities didn't match anything we know of in modern science. Maybe there was some ancient syndrome she suffered from, or something. But this morning, the DNA analysis came back, and it didn't match Homo sapiens. I let out a gasp. It couldn't be a new human ancestor, could it? He whispered. Not at only 10,000 years old, I said, twirling the same noodle over and over again with my fork. What did Dr. Katz say? He shook his head. Dr. Katz won't even engage me on this. He went on this whole rant telling me I didn't know what I was talking about, that I was going to ruin it for everyone. Told me to redo all the tests from the beginning. He finally met my eyes, and I don't know. I didn't like his tone, or the others. It almost feels conspiratorial, like they didn't want me to question things. He sucked in a breath. Do you think you can meet me at the lab tomorrow afternoon? Sure. He pushed out his chair and started to get up, but then paused in front of my desk, locking eyes with me. Maria? Yeah? He let out a shuddering breath. I have to admit, I'm terrified. We have this skeleton that looks almost human, but isn't. The Uncanny Valley, the fear we feel when something looks human but is just a little off. It isn't a new concept. It's gained popularity recently with the rise of creepy humanoid robots, but even Sigmund Freud talked about it in 1919, using dolls and wax figures as examples. He thought that our fears came from the idea that if inanimate objects looked like us, maybe they could have a soul. Evolutionary scientists, on the other hand, had a different theory. They said people infected with a communicable disease will look and act a little off, so if that instinctively scares us, it would help us survive. But this skeleton wasn't a human with some communicable disease, unless that disease involved reshaping bone and altering DNA. I stared down at the remains of the table, trying to imagine what a human woman with this skeleton would look like. But the only images that popped into my head looked like they came out of a horror movie. Creepy women with eyes too close together, arms too long hair falling over their faces as they stared at me with wide, blank eyes. The stretch marks on the scaphoid suggested torsional load-bearing, Kevin said, circling around the table to join me. I think she spent a good amount of time on all fours. What? He pointed at the small marks on the wrist bones. There was a rushing sound in my ears as I stared down at the yellow bone. That's horrifying, I finally muttered. What about this isn't horrifying? He replied. Why couldn't I have found some freaking pottery or something else instead? I finally tore my eyes away from her. Did you find anything else around her? Any evidence of humans settling there? Well, I didn't, but her skeleton was only found 5 miles from Aveline's Hole. You know, the burial site, near where they found Cheddar Man. Right. So she could be connected to them in some way. Could have interacted with them. Could have. I stared down at the yellowed skull, the dark lifeless holes where her eyes would have been, that were just a bit too close together. That internal smile of her crooked teeth, with the mandible too large for the rest of her skull. And then, I saw it. Kevin? Kevin came around to stand next to me. I pointed at the side of the skull, trying to find the words. My throat was dry. She doesn't have a corneal suture, or any other structures. Her skull, it's all one bone. What? We stared in horror at the skull. My mind was racing 1,000 miles a minute. I knew what it must mean, but it didn't make any sense. There was no way, was there? I sucked in a shaky breath. Without them, her skull wouldn't be able to mold during birth, or grow, as she grew. Kevin's face dropped. You mean, her skull has been the same size her entire life? I stared at the skeleton beneath me, spots of darkness starting to shimmer at the edge of my vision. She was never born. She was never a child, she just came into being, like this. I found that our discovery wasn't the only one of its kind. In the past 50 years, 3 other skeletons had been found, similar to ours. Absence of skull sutures, strange stress marks that implied walking on all fours, physiological anomalies that didn't match up with Homo sapiens. They ranged from 10,000 years old too, terrifyingly only 500 years old. But there is something even stranger about each of the discoveries. They all seem to be a part of a cover-up. When the skeletons were retested, the articles claimed everything matched up. They simply seemed to have deformities that were a result of a genetic disorder. The DNA was human, the skull sutures were there after all, and everything was okay. The idea that these things weren't human were relegated to French conspiracy theorists and tabloid papers like The Sun. Maybe it is a human ancestor, Kevin told me when I shared my research with him. That one skeleton was only found 500 years ago, though, I replied. I think there'd be more of them if that were true, or at least evidence of them in writing, art. Maybe it was a tiny isolated population. The skeletons were found all over, though. Europe, Canada, Brazil. Yeah, he shook his head. I don't know what to make of it. I stared at the computer screen, unsure of what to say. None of this made sense, at all. And I knew one thing. I didn't really want to be in the same room as that skeleton again. Ever. Kevin, call me back now. Damn it, Kevin, pick up the freaking phone. Kevin! Kevin wasn't picking up. I sounded halfway deranged in my voicemails, but I had a good reason to be. Because after staying up all night, I found something. I found something so horrible that it made my blood turn to ice. I found a post on a forum. Then I made a series of calls. To a hospital, to a morgue, to a police station. And after pulling at all the threads, there was one man willing to talk to me. An old detective by the name of Jack Thomas. After a 6-hour car ride, I was there. The morgue called me about Jane Doe, he said, as he leaned back in his moldy green recliner. His living room looked like a time capsule. Wood panel walls, orange carpet, a record player in the corner. The man in front of me looked close to 80, with still gray curly hair that contrasted sharply with his brown skin. But his mind was as sharp as a tack. This was 2 days after New Year's Eve, 1983. The Jane Doe was found up in the mountains, off of one of the hiking trails. We thought she was some partier maybe, that had gotten drunk and wandered off and died. There wasn't any signs of foul play. We couldn't identify her dental records or anything else. She had no tattoos, no birthmarks, nothing like that. And that wasn't unusual. But then, the coroner. He pulled me aside. There's something with that woman, he told me. And the coroner, he was a skeptical kind of guy, not religious or into the supernatural or anything like that. Not afraid to poke around dead bodies all day either. So to see him scared, it was something else. Her arms are too long, he told me. All her proportions are off. And when he brought me in to take a look at the body, I saw he was right. There was something terribly off about the woman. It haunts me to this day. Her eyes, he trails off, shaking his head. All the blood drained from my face. This wasn't some ancient woman, some ancient creature. There was something existing with us, evolving with us, living on the outskirts of society, haunting us. And we found evidence. We found bodies. And every single time it was covered up. Kevin, damn it, I'm driving to your house, I said in my final voicemail before I got into my car and drove to his place. Kevin was gone. I went to his house. His wife doesn't know where he is. She's in the process of filing a missing persons report. He's still not picking up his phone. And I have a horrible feeling he never will. The evidence for this thing has been covered up, swept under the rug for decades, centuries. Someone wants this thing to survive, to continue stalking us, evolving with us. With how long the secret has been kept, I'm sure many have died in their struggle for the truth. I fear I may be next. I've been driving for 2 days now. Soon I'll be starting my life over, taking on a new name, cutting off my old life. But I will continue searching for the truth. I'm moving into a house that borders thousands of acres of deep woods. Maybe if I'm lucky, one day I'll look out my window, and I'll see a woman standing there, with eyes too close, and arms too long, staring back at me.